In the previous tutorial, we created a really versatile cinematic lighting setup, which should be easy enough to tweak and get a variety of moods and styles. In this one, we'll have a look at light groups, the amazing feature of Blender that allows relighting our render once it's finished. Using light groups, we will browse through different looks in the blink of an eye, getting most value out of our lighting setup that we built for exactly that kind of versatility. By the end of this video, you should be able to relight your renders for testing different looks or for nailing that perfect light balance. A quick disclaimer. It could be quicker to adjust the lights right in the viewport and then simply re-render. It's not that light groups magically solve all problems. They do solve some, though. Okay, so let the light groups fun begin. Here is a quick refresher of how our lighting setup is structured. As we remember from the previous chapter, we were adding light layers in a step-by-step fashion, creating a new collection for each layer to keep it tidy. So now we have more than 10 such layers, including special effects and practical lights for that matter. You can go through each one of them in the outliner to remind yourself what is what. Basically, we are gonna be turning each collection into a light group from the menu that can be found in the View Layer Properties tab. That is what are we gonna be doing for the next whatever minutes. A proper naming scheme is a must-have, obviously, otherwise we won't be able to make sense of it all later on, trust me. So I'm extending the light groups window and pressing the plus button to start adding light groups. Each group should correspond to a certain collection, so the first one is gonna be HDRI environment. Then we have the first and the second key lights, that it should correspond obviously to these collections. And then I'll just spam some more light groups and go through a somewhat tedious naming process, renaming everything furiously. Don't forget about the practical lights subfolders too. Okay, one too many. Okay, should be fine now. The light group's preparation process includes assigning the light sources or any object with emissive materials to their groups. It takes some time, but it's the way it works. Let's start with the HDRI sphere. Gonna select it, then go down the Object Properties, Shading, Light Group, and pick the corresponding light group from the drop-down menu there. HDRI environment one in this case, of course. Then to the first key light. We have 3 objects in the light_key_01 collection. I'll hold Shift and then select all these 3 objects, with one of them being active. Then I'm gonna pick the right group from the drop-down, but then only the active object highlighted in yellow will be assigned to this group. As far as I understand, we still have to right-click and copy this light group to select it, so all 3 now get their light group assigned. Let's do the same with the second key light. Shift-click, pick a proper one, right-click, copy to select it. The same process for the rim light. That's why it was important to name everything in a clean manner, otherwise we would be in quite a pickle right now. For practicals, we have their own subfolders and light groups. L01 goes to Practical 01, L02 to its own group, so on and so forth. L03... It's a tedious process. Okay, to play it safe, I'll select all objects from the sensors collection, as I don't remember which ones actually emit any light, then Control-click on one of the objects to make it active, so I'm gonna add it all to the sensors group, just in case. Right-click, copy. This part of the process is definitely not my favorite, by far. So that was the initial setup anyway. Now we also need to store the denoising data though, which will come in handy later on, and that pretty much concludes a boring preparation process. After all the light groups set up, we can go ahead and render it all out now. The first thing to define is what resolution our render and all the passes are gonna be. 1920 by 1080 pixels to keep it nice and fast. Then I'll open the render properties and set the render samples for a more or less high quality render. Let's say around 1000 samples. It doesn't matter if denoising is turned on and off there. The light paths are okay as well. Now time to render. And that should be it for the preparation. It will be worth checking the light passes in the compositor right after rendering, because you never know. I'm gonna go to the Blender compositor. Here we go. Right away I will take use nodes and then backdrop. Then in order to preview our rendered light groups, we need to hold Ctrl Shift and click on render layers. That will set up the viewer for us. V and Alt V scales the preview up and down, while the Alt and middle mouse button can be used for panning around. It looks like all the light groups that we prepared so carefully got rendered indeed. If you want to preview it, just drag any layer into the viewer. Like that's the HDRI environment layer, and that's our first key light. Holding Ctrl Shift and clicking a bunch of times consecutively should switch the channels. So these are our light layers and special effects layers for that matter. Don't worry about the cycles noise just yet. We're looking at the raw passes that are gonna go through denoising later on, and it will be fine. Okay, I think everything is in place, it seems. We stand on a crossroad now. Either keep working in Compositor without leaving Blender, or save the light groups to an EXR file so we can access it anytime without re-rendering. If you choose to do compositing right away after hitting the render button, then you simply carry on. The basic operation when working with light groups is using the Mix node to add layers together, to compose them together, and then use the Mix slider to define the amount. This is it. That's the basic way of adding the light passes together. That being said, I'll choose the second road, I think, to export all these light groups or passes to a separate file to keep it safe. So I'll go Image Editor. This should be our rendered result. Then Image, Save As. Remember, we've talked about the benefits of 32-bit EXRs in the first chapter. On top of being the best interchange format for holding the unbounded light values, it also has an amazing feature storing multiple passes in one file. For that, we will need to choose the multi-layer OpenEXR format. That's gonna be robo_render_01EXR. We can try firing up a new Blender file now and try importing our newly created multi-layer EXR there. Here I'm in a compositor in the Blender already. Click Use Nodes. The default render layers node can go. Then Input, Image. Now it's time to find our EXR. And here we go. As we can see, it unpacked the light groups very nicely indeed. Everything is in place. The order got messed up a bit though, I think, but I can live with that. The color space should default to linear like it did here, and the layer should be the view layer. Okay, so far so good. There was no quality loss, by the way. The layers from the imported file should look just like the layers after hitting the render button. We can activate backdrop preview now and we are all set. Compositing the light layers together is actually surprisingly easy after the layers themselves were all set. As a quick reminder, Ctrl-Shift-Click launches the preview and consecutive clicks switch through the outputs. Right, so everything was imported. We can preview those layers really quickly. Starting with the HDRI environment, I'll gradually reconstruct our final lighting setup first by adding these layers together one by one. All layer mixing operations are done with the Mix node. So here I'm dragging the key light output into the second image slot and changing the blending mode to Add. We can decide how much of this key light group do we want to have in our composite. Do we want to have a full effect or just a little bit of that light and so on. Now, if we wanted to tweak the exposure or some other property of that layer, the adjustment layer is plugged like in between. The thing about the mix factor though is that it can go higher than 1 to linearly increase the amount of exposure by that factor in that light group that is being mixed with some other light group. Incidentally, the data from our multilayer XR file still goes through the Blender's color management pipeline, namely through the Filmic View transform that prepares it for our displays and is affected by exposure and other settings there. In our original RoboCharacter scene, the exposure was brought down to -2 to start from a dimmed down base. But then we can also play with the base contrast, either via the Look drop-down menu or, let's say, by adjusting the curves. The S-shaped curve boosts the contrast, for example, and more sophisticated color tweaks require tinkering around with the red, green and blue channels. Personally, I love playing with the complementary color contrasts by cranking up, let's say, green in the highlights and bringing it down in the shadows. The same for the blue channel. It is worth noting that the whole view transform and color management thing is applied the last, after the post-pro chain in Blender Compositor is evaluated. And it is instantaneous. It doesn't need any sort of calculation, which is a nice bonus. To sum it up, it's never a wrong time to make adjustment to such fundamental things as exposure and the contrast levels. What I did is reduced exposure all the way to -2 to keep the lighting levels fairly low key, and then this color grading mastering with RGB curves on top of it. Nothing too fancy though. Now it is time to build the whole chain of light groups, one by one. We already have the environment and the first key light. Now I'm gonna press Shift-D to duplicate the mix node and plug it in, then drag and drop the light key 02 in the open socket. Again, there's the mix factor to control the amount, and it technically be larger than 1. Let's say 5, 55, whatever. I'm going to make some room for a few more nodes here. Plug in one more mix, hook the rim light up. We will play with the ratios later. Now I'm just testing this stuff out. I'm just curious how it looks. Come on. M toggles nodes on and off like that. Now on to the sun group. So Shift-D. The mix node is still set to add, by the way. Okay. Then the first practical to do. Very, very nice. Let's fast track our setup a bit until pretty much everything is connected. Cool. Sometimes the connections go across the screen like that when we click and drag our output around. Alternatively, the F shortcut draws the connection if the start and destination nodes are both selected. Just a quick tip. And here goes the last one. Whew, the light groups chain is fully formed and ready for our adjustments. As we are composing the raw, noisy passes straight from cycles, they have to be denoised eventually. The best placement for the denoise node is probably right after the light groups chain, and before any potential color grading and other post-processing. To make it look best, the albedo and normal inputs should be filled in though. They can be found there in the render layers. So here we go. I didn't know about the F shortcut to draw connections between nodes and recording this video, I swear. I'm doing it in a good old drag and drop manner. Okay, the denoise can be a bit slow, certainly takes a few seconds to process, so I'm muting it with M shortcut for the time being, to toggle it back on later after we finish some more stuff. To double down on the sequence of actions, the post-pro adjustments of any kind, like color balance, will come into play after denoising, which will eventually be turned back on when we are ready to save the final composite, if that all makes sense. That is our structure of how we treat post-processing. First, the light groups chain, then denoising, temporarily turned off, then the rest of the adjustments. Okay, now we can delete the color balance node. That was meant as a quick demo, and I'll also shut down the denoise for now to keep it nice and fast. Before we go any further, I just wanted to say that there are a few things that we can do to speed up the denoise node. With the accurate type of pre-filter, it's a solid few seconds to calculate. It becomes a lot faster, well, with the fast, or better yet, non-type of pre-filtering. It loses some of the quality as well, but who cares just yet? That being said, I'm still switching it off altogether for the time being. The fastest option by far. Yet another hustle that I'm willingly submit to for the common good is giving descriptive names to all the nodes. This way we will know what light group is doing what. Just thought I would mention. So I'm right-clicking on the node, typing in the name, and just repeating the process over and over again until it's done. This one is lens flare, apparently. These are our light groups laid out really nicely with the descriptive names. Now we are ready to start playing with the light ratios. Woo! At last we can play with our light groups to relight the composition in some interesting way. How about turning it into the silhouette lighting setup, a moody backlighting type of look? I'm resizing the canvas with the help of V and Alt-V shortcuts, Alt and middle mouse button to move it. Okay, so to get the silhouette lighting, the key light should be ditched first. Boom, gone. The second key as well. The rim light, on the other hand, should get the promotion. This is it. I'm gonna type in 5 in there, or even 15. And out of a sudden, it took a step forward, a dramatic moonlight situation. The environment ambience is a bit of a show breaker right now. We should dim it down. As it doesn't have a mix factor, we need to use the exposure node instead to control its contribution. The environment serves as our fill light, so technically we are going full chiaroscuro by negating it. So be it. Never mind, leaving just a little bit of ambient light, just a touch. I thought we could give our backlighting a more pronounced dramatic shade of blue. That can be done by interjecting the mix node before the rim light group, using the color blending mode, and changing the color to fairly saturated cyan or something. How saturated should it be? I don't know. I chickened out, you know, to go the full blue. Just some not very brave pale cyan. The sunshine should be ditched as well, so we can play our moonlight card. What else? Does it make sense to make our practical lights brighter? It would probably make sense to make it brighter in the night setting, right? I think so. How about some complementary color for it? Say a shade of orange to play with a warm versus cold contrast? How about that? Solid. Now giving some more exposure to the top practical as well. Let's see the background practicals on the right, or on the left rather, and on the right as well. Now thinking about reducing the exposure of the extra practical lights, you know, to support the blob of darkness look. Okay, as for the dust, we'll just leave it be, it is okay. The sensor's backlighting could be a stronger focal point, all things considered, so multiplying its effect by, I don't know, by 25. Could be a good idea to do some look depth to play with the color variations now, as it's one of the most prominent bright spots in the image right now. Changing its color will affect the mood big way, no doubt about it. It is fairly amazing how easy it is to separate the lighting passes for different lights and emissive materials like that with light groups. It makes it extremely enjoyable once the tedious part is moved out of the way. just the part where we need to prepare our scene in order to play with the light ratios like that. Finally, the lens flare deserves to be way brighter. It is motivated by the main direction of light and intensity of light source somewhere at the back of the set, so it's all good, I think. It's pretty cool now. Now it should be a good time to turn on denoising, take a step back, and congratulate ourselves with a totally different lighting setup emerging without re-rendering anything, simply playing with the light ratios and colorization, and that is it. Pretty amazing. On a second thought, there's too much intensity in the backlight. Probably worth dividing it by 2. Returning to color management, will the higher contrast base level fit the idea of this lighting scheme much better? It could very well be the case, at least one of the possible interpretations. Personally, I don't like to crush the contrast as much though. I believe it is worth leaving at least some fill in the shadows, even in such extreme low-key backlighting styles. Alright, when we are happy with our new mood, we can jump into the image editor, reference the viewer node and save the result. Image, save as. Here we no longer necessarily need the 32-bit formats. If we aren't going to apply any post-processing, we can just save it in one of the display-referred 8-bit formats instead, like an 8-bit TIFF or PNG, or JPEG if you want it to be compressed, or whatever, and it'll be fine. Using the same process, all kind of genres and looks can be achieved. If you feel up to a quick challenge, maybe try reproducing something like a high-key ambient lighting setup, just by tweaking the knobs, or rather the light ratios in Blender Compositor, the intensities of the light groups. I can't wait to see what looks you will pull off using light groups. Feel free to grab the multilayer EXR used in this tutorial from the project files and give it a spin. Make sure to share your work-in-progress results with us on my Twitter or Adie's Twitter or Creative Shrimp Discord community, whatever floats your boat. It is much appreciated. To sum it all up, in Blender so many moods and styles can be grown of just one parent cinematic lighting setup we've created. Whether it's just tweaking the light ratios by hand or using light groups to speed up the process. I want to encourage you to explore this rabbit hole and take your time to play with all the possibilities this versatile basic setup offers you. Cannot wait to see what you create. In the next bonus video, we'll keep upgrading our lighting pipeline from the perspective of post-processing and a bit of color grading even. Thank you for watching. If you like this series, leave a comment on our social media or join our Discord community to share your progress with other students and just talk about lighting in Blender and in general. My name is Gleb Alexandrov and you're watching the Cinematic Lighting course. Thank you so much again. Take care and we'll see you in the next video.